I can still feel the weight of her in my arms. 7 years old, maybe 8. Small enough that carrying her through the snow should have been easy. It wasn't. The village elders are waiting for my answer. They've been waiting for 3 centuries, really, waiting for me to sleep to show them I'm exactly what they've always known I was. And tonight, I did. I chose her over the contract, over the system that kept them safe, over the lie I've been telling myself since before their great grandparents were born. They're going to kill me for it. They have the means. They've always had it, kept it locked in the church, like insurance against the day I remembered I was supposed to be human. But here's what they don't understand yet. I don't remember, not the way they think I do. And that's the part that should terrify them. My name is Deshaun Roth. I've been using it for so long, I almost believe it was always mine. 340 years is a long time to enforce a rule you didn't write. Long enough that you forget you didn't write it. Long enough that when the villages send their representatives every winter with a child bound in wool and ceremony, you stop seeing it as murder and start seeing it as maintenance, like sharpening a blade, like mending a roof before the snow comes. I told myself I was keeping them safe, that without the contract, I'd be what I was in those first decades, uncontrolled, insatiable, the thing that empties entire valleys before winter ends. The contract gave me structure, gave them predictability, one child every solstice, and the rest of them get to live, grow old, bury their dead from natural causes. It worked. For 3 centuries, it worked. But tonight, I looked at the girl they brought me and saw something I shouldn't be able to see anymore, a familiarity. A shape in her face that pulled at a part of me I thought had dissolved decades ago, maybe longer. I don't know her. I'm almost certain I don't. But when she looked at me, I remembered that I used to be someone who would have died to protect a child like her. Used to be. The villages know what I did. They saw me carry her back down the mountain instead of taking her inside. They've already sent word to the other settlements. By morning, every elder in the region will know that the contract is broken, that I am no longer the controlled thing they bargained with. They are wrong about why I spared her, but they are right about what it means. I have until dawn to decide whether I run or whether I finally tell them the truth about how this started, about what I traded to become this, about the thing they've been keeping in the church that I pretended not to know existed. Either way, someone is going to die. I want to be clear about something before this goes any further. I am not a monster who discovered compassion. I didn't have some spiritual awakening on that mountainside. I don't even know if what I felt when I looked at the girl was real or just the echo of something I used to feel. The way you can still sense a limb after it's been cut away. I think of myself as rational, disciplined. For 3 centuries, I've maintained order in a region where order should be impossible. The villages feared me, yes, but they also relied on me. I kept the terms clear. I never took more than we agreed upon. I never broke into homes or slaughtered livestock or terrorized children in the streets the way the old stories describe. They gave me what I needed and I gave them structure, safety, even. That's what I told myself. But there's something I've known for a long time and chosen not to examine too closely. I can't remember my daughter's name. I remember that I had one. I remember she died. I remember the fever, the helplessness, the way I stood outside our home listening to her cough through the walls because I'd been too proud to stay. Too certain I could negotiate better, trade terms 2 villages over, while my wife sat vigil alone. I remember deciding, in the days after we buried her, that I would never be powerless again. I remember finding the woman in the forest who promised me exactly that. But my daughter's name, gone. And not just her name, her face is starting to go too. I can recall the shape of her, the size, the age. But when I try to see her clearly, The details slide away like snow melting under my hands. Sometimes I think her hair was dark. Sometimes I'm certain it was light. I don't know which memory is real and which I've invented to fill the silence. I didn't tell you this to earn sympathy. I'm telling you because it matters. Because when I looked at Mina tonight, that's the girl's name, Mina, I felt certain I recognized her. Certain I knew the shape of her chin, the way her breath fogged in the cold air. And I can't tell you if that's true or if I've simply forgotten so much that every frightened child looks like the one I lost. That's the part that scares me more than anything the villages are planning. I don't know if I saved her because of who she is or because I'm losing track of who I was. It happened in late autumn, 3 weeks after we buried her. I didn't go looking for it. That's important. I tell myself that anyway. I was walking the forest trails north of the village because I couldn't stand to be inside the house anymore. Couldn't stand the way people looked at me, half pity, half judgment. Your wife needed you. You should have been there, as if I didn't know. The woman was sitting on a fallen log near the river crossing. She wasn't hidden, wasn't dramatic about it. She looked like she'd been waiting the way you'd wait for someone you'd made an appointment with. Middle-aged, plain clothing, hands folded in her lap. If I'd seen her in the village square, I wouldn't have looked twice. She said my daughter's name. I stopped. I don't remember what I said back, if I said anything. She repeated it. Then she said, "You weren't there." It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact, delivered the way you'd comment on the weather. And somehow that made it worse. I should have walked away, should have crossed the river and gone home. But I stood there and I listened because she was the first person who said it plainly, instead of dancing around it with soft voices and careful distance. She told me I could have what I'd wanted: control, certainty, the power to make sure I never lost anything again because I was too slow, too mortal, too bound by the limits of a single human lifetime. I don't remember saying yes, but I also don't remember saying no. What I remember is a hand on my wrist, cold enough that I flinched. I remember her saying, "You'll need to decide what you're willing to forget." I didn't understand. I told her I didn't want to forget anything. That was the point, wasn't it? To hold on. She smiled, and it wasn't cruel, just tired. She said it didn't work that way, that the thing I was asking for had a cost, and the cost was that I'd pay it so slowly I wouldn't notice until it was too late to matter. Then she caught her palm, held it out, and I knew what she was offering. I should tell you I hesitated. I should tell you I thought about my wife, about the life I still had, about whether this was grief or greed. But I would be lying. I took her hand, I drank, and the entire time I did it, I felt nothing but relief because finally, I was doing something. Instead of sitting in that house waiting for time to make the pain smaller, it didn't hurt. That's what I remember most. No burning, no transformation, no agony. Just a sense of something sliding into place. A lock turning. I don't know how long I stood there afterward. When I looked up, she was gone. The forest was darker than it should have been. And when I tried to remember what my daughter's voice sounded like, I couldn't. Not gone exactly, just muffled, like hearing someone speak through a closed door. That was the first thing I lost. I didn't realize there would be others. I didn't realize I'll still be losing them 300 years later. I went home that first night thinking I'd misunderstood what had happened, that maybe I'd been sick, feverish, and imagined the whole encounter. My wife was asleep, the house was dark. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and tried to remember the last thing I'd said to her before I left for the forest. Nothing came, not the words, not the tone, just a blank space where the memory should have been. I told myself it was shock. Grief does strange things to memory. I'd heard people say that. I undressed quietly and lay down beside her, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel tired. Didn't feel anything, really. Just alert, waiting. I waited all night. When dawn came, I still hadn't slept. The first week, I thought I was just restless. The second week, I realized I didn't need sleep anymore. Didn't want it. I'd lie next to my wife and listen to her breathe, and the sound started to bother me in ways I couldn't articulate. Too loud, too rhythmic. I began spending nights in the workshop instead, carving things I didn't need just to give my hands something to do. Food tasted wrong, not spoiled, just irrelevant. I'd eat because my wife expected me to, and I'd feel nothing. No hunger satisfied, no pleasure, just the mechanical process of chewing and swallowing while she watched me across the table with eyes that were starting to look worried in a new way. I tried to remember the day we married. I could see the church, the season autumn, I think, but I couldn't see her face the way it had been then. Young, unburdened. I tried to picture my daughter at the wedding, but that didn't make sense. She hadn't been born yet, or had she? The timeline felt slippery. I was forgetting, not dramatically, not all at once, just small things eroding at the edges like a riverbank. The hunger came later. It started as a thought I couldn't shake that the blacksmith apprentice who'd helped carry my daughter's casket had looked at me with something close to satisfaction, like he was glad. It wasn't true. I knew it wasn't true, but the thought lodged itself in my mind and grew. I started watching him, following him, sometimes at a distance, learning his routine. One night, I found myself standing outside his home, just standing there. The door was closed. I could hear voices inside his wife, his children. I wanted to go in, needed to, but my hand wouldn't reach for the door. I stood there for nearly an hour, and it was like there was a wall I couldn't name, something that stopped me just as surely as if the door had been barred. Eventually, his wife opened it. She was taking scraps out for the pigs. She saw me and gasped, and I thought she'd scream, but she didn't. She just stared and then very quietly said, "Come in, please." The words felt wrong in her mouth, forced, but the moment she said them, I could move forward. I stepped across the threshold. I didn't kill him. I want to be clear about that. I didn't even touch him. I just stood in his home while his family pressed themselves against the far wall, and I felt something shift inside me. A satisfaction that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with power. I could have done anything. They knew it. I knew it. I left, walked back through the village, and by the time I reached my own door, I couldn't remember the blacksmith's name. I couldn't remember why I had been angry with him in the first place. But I remembered how it felt to stand in his home uninvited. No, not uninvited. She'd invited me. She'd said the words even though her voice shook. And that was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. That she'd given me permission because she was terrified of what I'd do if she didn't. That's when I understood I wasn't going to get better. I started avoiding my wife. Started working at night because it was easier than pretending I still belonged in that house, in that bed, in that life. I'd find myself at thresholds, doorways, gates, property lines, and I'd stop waiting. Sometimes people saw me, sometimes they didn't. The ones who did would stare and then they'd speak. They'd invite me in or they'd tell me to leave. And both felt like the same kind of trap. I never went home during the day. I told my wife I was working, traveling. She stopped asking. 3 months after the forest, I tried to say her name, my wife's name, and realized I wasn't certain what it was. That's when I knew the woman had been telling the truth. I was going to forget everything, one piece at a time, until there was nothing left but this. I found the records in the church 3 nights after I spared Mina. I wasn't looking for them. I was looking for the thing. I knew they had the object they'd kept all these years as insurance, the cloth. My daughter's fever cloth, the one my wife had pressed to her forehead in those final hours. I'd pretended not to know they had it, pretended I didn't understand what it meant. But breaking the contract changed the rules. If they were going to use it against me, I needed to see it first, to know if burning it would really end me the way the woman in the forest had implied. The records were in a wooden box beneath the altar. Ledgers, generations of them, names, dates, bloodlines. I almost didn't open them, almost left. But I saw my name, my real name, the one I'd nearly forgotten. They'd been tracking my family line for 300 years. Not just tracking, cultivating it. My son, the one I would barely remember that I had, the one who'd been 6 years old when I left and never came back, they'd married him into specific families. His children, the same. On and on, carefully documented notes in the margins about features, temperament, resemblance. They were breeding for something, for someone who looked like her, like my daughter. I sat there on the stone floor of the church, reading entries made by people who died a century ago, and I understood. The villages hadn't been victims of the contract, they'd been architects. They proposed it knowing I would accept because it gave structure to the thing I would become, knowing that structure would comfort me, that I would convince myself I was protecting them. And they'd waited 300 years, waited for a child to be born who looked enough like the girl I was forgetting to trigger exactly what happened 3 nights ago. Mina wasn't random, she was inevitable. I thought back to the moment I'd seen her, the recognition I'd felt. I thought it was memory surfacing, a fragment of my humanity clawing its way back. But it wasn't memory, it was design. They'd engineered her to look like the ghost of something I could barely recall, betting that even a monster forgets slowly enough to be manipulated. And it worked. I'd broken the contract exactly as they'd planned, showed them I was unpredictable, showed them I still had weaknesses that could be exploited. The elders had probably been preparing for this moment since before they were born, taught by their grandparents who were taught by theirs. I am not their predator, I am their project. The worst part, the part that made me sit there until the pre-dawn light started filtering through the narrow windows, was realizing some part of me had known the contract was too convenient, too clean, that people don't negotiate with monsters, they kill them or they run. They don't build systems that last 3 centuries unless the system serves them somehow. I'd known, and I'd pretended not to, because the alternative was admitting I wasn't the necessary evil, keeping chaos at bay. I was just the chaos they'd learned to schedule. The fever cloth was in the box too, folded carefully, preserved. I held it and tried to remember her face, my daughter's face, and I couldn't. Couldn't remember my wife's face either. Couldn't remember my son's, just shapes, approximations, blank spaces where people used to be. But I remembered Mina's face perfectly because it wasn't a memory, it was a blueprint. I put everything back, left the church, and I realized the choice I thought I had made 3 nights ago wasn't a choice at all. The real choice is what I do now that I know. I went to find Mina the next night. I told myself it was to warn her, to tell her what I'd learned, that she wasn't safe even if I had spared her, that the villages would take her back, complete the ritual, prove the contract still held. But I think I went because she was the only clear thing left, the only memory I had that wasn't dissolving. She was being kept in a barn on the eastern edge of the village, not locked in, not guarded. They knew I'd broken the terms. They were waiting to see what I'll do next, whether I'd finish what I started or whether I'll try to run. Either way, they had their answer prepared. She was awake when I got there, sitting in the straw, arms wrapped around her knees. She looked at me and didn't scream. That should have told me something. I stood at the threshold. The barn door was open. but I couldn't make myself step inside, not without permission. Even now, even knowing what the rules were and why they existed, I couldn't break them. The woman in the forest had built the trap too well. Mina watched me for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "You can come in." 7 years old, maybe 8. And she'd already learned how this worked. I stepped inside, crouched down a few feet away from her, far enough that she didn't flinch. I tried to explain what I'd found in the church, that she wasn't random, that her bloodline had been shaped for this, that the villages had been planning my failure for longer than most kingdoms last. She listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "I know." I stared at her. She said, "My mother told me before they brought me up the mountain, she said you'd either take me or you wouldn't, and either way, it wasn't my fault." Her mother, my great 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 had lost count granddaughter, a woman whose name I didn't know, who'd been taught since childhood that one day her child might be the one, and she'd prepared her, given her the words to say if I came back, told her how to survive me. I asked if she wanted to run. She looked at me like I'd said something stupid. Where? She was right. Winter was setting in. The mountain passes would close within days. I couldn't take her through them. I was strong, yes, but she was human and small, and the cold would kill her long before we reached the lowlands. And I couldn't take her to another village. They all knew the contract. They all knew what it meant that I'd broken it. Nowhere was the answer. There was nowhere. I should have left then, should have let her stay in that barn and faced the villages alone. But I didn't. I picked her up, she didn't resist, and I carried her out of the village. Not toward the mountains, toward the old mill on the river, the one that had been abandoned for a decade. I told myself I was buying time, keeping her hidden, until I figured out a real plan. The truth was simpler. I couldn't let her go. Not because I cared about her. I want to be honest about that. Because she was the last thing I could see clearly, the last person whose face I knew. And if I lost her, I would have nothing left but the blood shapes of 3 centuries I could barely piece together. I was keeping her for the same reason I had accepted the contract in the first place. Because it was easier than admitting I had no idea who I was anymore. The villagers found us 2 nights later. Not with torches and pitchforks, nothing that dramatic. Just the elders, 5 of them. They stood outside the mill in the snow and waited. I knew they wouldn't come in uninvited. But I also knew they didn't need to. One of them called out, said they had something to show me. They held up the fever cloth. Even from a distance, even in the dark, I recognized it. The man holding it, an elder I had taken children from for 40 years, whose grandfather I had taken children from before him, said they'd burn it at dawn, that I could stop them by honoring the contract, by finishing what I had started. I looked at Mina. She was awake, pressed against the far wall of the mill, watching me. I thought about the woman in the forest, the choice she'd offered: control, certainty, the power to never lose anything again because I'd be too strong to be touched by time or illness or human frailty. But she'd lied or I'd misunderstood because I'd lost everything. Just slowly enough that I didn't notice until I was standing in an abandoned mill with a child I couldn't save and a piece of cloth that could end me, and I couldn't remember why any of it had seemed worth it. I told the elders I needed until dawn. They agreed. They knew I had nowhere to go, knew I couldn't run with her and couldn't stay without her, knew that every option I had led back to the same place. The moment where I chose between dying and becoming exactly what I had spent 3 centuries pretending I wasn't. After they left, I tried to remember my daughter's name one more time. I couldn't, but I could remember the blacksmith's apprentice, the man whose home I'd entered, the fear in his wife's voice when she invited me in. I could remember every child I'd taken over 300 years. Not their names, not their faces, just the number, the tally, the clean, structured efficiency of the contract. That's what I kept, that's what I would chosen to remember. And now I was out of choices. Dawn was 4 hours away. I spent the last hour before dawn sitting across from Mina in the mill, not speaking. She didn't ask what I was going to do. She already knew the options. Stay and let them burn the cloth. Run and let the cold kill her. Give her back and leave. Three choices. None of them good. I kept thinking about the woman in the forest. How she'd said I'll pay the cost so slowly I wouldn't notice until it was too late to matter. She'd been right. I would spend 300 years losing pieces of myself, memories, connections, the ability to feel anything that wasn't hunger or control, and I'd barely notice because the contract gave me something to organize my existence around, a purpose, a rule set. The villages understood that better than I did. They'd built the contract knowing I'd cling to it, that I'd convinced myself it made me necessary instead of monstrous, that I'd mistake structure for morality. And when I finally broke it, when I finally had what I thought was a human impulse, a flicker of the person I used to be, it was just another manipulation, another part of their design. I looked at Mina. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not fear, not hope, just observation. Like she was waiting to see which version of the story her mother had prepared her for. I thought about my daughter, the real one, the one whose name I couldn't remember. I tried to picture what she would have looked like at 7 or 8, whether she would have had Mina's eyes or her chin or the way she sat with her knees pulled up, but I couldn't separate what I actually remembered from what I'd invented. Couldn't tell if I was seeing my daughter or just the blueprint the villages had bred into this child. That's when I understood the cruelest part of it. It didn't matter whether Mina actually looked like my daughter or not. It didn't matter if the recognition I'd felt was real or engineered, because either way, I'd already lost. If it was real, then I'd forgotten so much that I couldn't trust my own grief. And if it was engineered, then the last human thing I thought I had the ability to recognize someone I'd loved was just another lever someone else could pull. The woman in the forest had promised me control. But control was just another word for making the same choice over and over until you forgot you were choosing. I stood up. Mina watched me but didn't move. I told her I was going to take her back to the village. She nodded, like she'd expected it. I picked her up. She was light and she didn't struggle. We walked through the snow toward the village center. The elders were already there, waiting in the pre-dawn dark. The fever cloth was laid out on a stone near the church steps, kindling piled around it, ready. They didn't say anything when I approached, just watched. I set Mina down. She stood beside me, close enough that I could feel her shivering. One of the elders stepped forward, reaching for her. I didn't move. The elder stopped, looked at me, waiting to see what I'd do. I looked at the fever cloth, the last physical piece of my daughter, the thing that tied me to my human death, to the moment I'd made the choice that led to this. 300 years ago, I'd wanted power enough to forget everything, and now the forgetting was almost complete. I could give them Mina, honor the contract one last time, live, or I could let them burn the cloth, save her, end. But neither of those was the real choice. The real choice was whether I wanted to keep pretending the contract had ever been about protection. Whether I wanted 3 more centuries of structured horror, convincing myself that control and morality were the same thing. Whether I wanted to keep forgetting until there was nothing left but the routine. I looked at the elder. I said, burn it. His expression didn't change. He'd probably expected this too. They'd planned for every version of this moment. But then I turned to Mina. I said, you need to invite me in to the church. She stared at me. I said it again, quietly, invite me into the church. She understood before the elders did. Her voice was small but clear. "You can come in." I crossed the threshold, walked past the altar to where I knew they kept the records. The box with 300 years of names and bloodlines and careful planning. I picked it up, brought it outside, set it next to the fever cloth. Then I looked at the elder holding the torch. I said, "Burn it all." He hesitated, not because he cared about the records they'd served their purpose, but because he was realizing what I was realizing. That burning the cloth would kill me, yes, but it would also end the contract. No more sacrifices, no more structure. The villages would have to survive without their controlled monster. And they'd have to live with the knowledge that for 300 years, they could have done this at any time. They chose not to, just like I chose not to see it. The elder lit the torch, touched it to the kindling. I watched the cloth catch fire, watched the records curl and blacken, and I felt nothing. No pain, no release. Just a distant curiosity about whether this was what dying had felt like the first time and whether I had forgotten that too. Mina was still standing beside me. I looked down at her. I said, "Run." She did. The cloth burned faster than I expected. I didn't disappear, didn't collapse. I just stood there while the flames consumed 3 centuries of insurance, and I waited to understand what dying would feel like this time. It took hours. The sun came up. I felt it for the first time in longer than I could measure actual warmth on skin that had been cold since the forest. It didn't burn me, didn't turn me to ash. It just hot. A deep, whole body ache, like waking up after sleeping in one position too long. The elders had scattered. I don't know when. I looked around and they were gone. And the fire had burned down to embers. And I was still standing. Still here. I don't know if the woman in the forest lied about the cloth, or if I misunderstood, or if 300 years changed the rules. I don't know if I'm dying slowly now, or if I've just returned to being the thing I was before, mortal, fallible, capable of ending. I can't tell the difference anymore. I left the village, walked north until I found a place where no one knew the contract or my name or what I'd been. I'm writing this from a room that isn't mine, in a town I won't stay in. I still don't sleep, still don't eat. But the hunger is different now, quieter, like it's waiting for something. I think about Mina sometimes, wonder if she made it out of the region, if the villages left her alone, or if they decided she needed to pay for my choice. I tell myself she survived, that she's somewhere warm, forgetting my face the way I forgot my daughter's. I hope she forgets faster than I did. I can almost remember my daughter's name now. It's there, just out of reach. Close enough that I think if I wait long enough, it might come back. But I don't know if that's real or just another thing I'm inventing to fill the silence. 300 years I spent building a system to avoid admitting what I was. And in the end, the only honest thing I did was let it burn. I don't know if that makes me better or just finally belatedly truthful. But I know this, the contract is over. The villages will have to find another way to survive their winters. And I will have to find another way to survive myself. I think that's what the woman meant about control. You never really have it. You just get better at pretending you do until someone forces you to choose. I don't know if Dashan is still out there. I don't know if he ever really existed, or if stories like his are just the way we try to make sense of the things people do when they convince themselves structure and morality are the same. But I think about his question sometimes, the one he never asked out loud. How much can you forget before you stop being the person who made the original choice? And if you can't remember why you started something, does stopping it count as redemption or just exhaustion? If that sits with you the way it sits with me, I'll be grateful to hear your thoughts. And if you want more stories like these ones that don't give easy answers, I'll be here. Thanks for listening.